What's up, gang? Welcome to The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh. I'm so pumped to have you here with me. Now listen, The Greatness Machine, we're about two things. Number one, people who are living their passions. And number two, those who are creating greatness in the world and doing both of these things despite the odds against them. Each episode, we're going to feature interviews with game changers, business leaders, telling us their origin stories, what made them tick, what got them to where they are now. Why? So it can help you step into your greatness within your life, your business, and your career. Occasionally, you might hear a few solo episodes from myself, moi, as I say, as I leverage my 20 years of entrepreneurship as a CEO and founder to help you grow and level up in your journey to scale your life and your business. So come be a fly on the wall, enjoy the conversation, and I'm stoked to have you here with me. What's up, everybody? Welcome to today's episode of The Greatness Machine. I'm your host, Darius Mirshahzadeh, and I'm flying solo. And I've been holding back on this solo episode for a long time. And I've actually been doing a lot of my solos based on this entire solo, but I'm gonna come out in public and tell you a story of something that profoundly changed my life that happened to me. It'll be 3 years ago this summer. And I want to take a step back. So look, I've talked a lot about on the show about my struggle with anxiety in my life. And it's something that I feel like I've gotten really strong at managing and resourced around controlling. And I started that journey a long time ago. I mean, and I can talk about what created the anxiety, but that's not really the point of this story. The point of the story is that I'm a person that identified myself as an anxious person for my entire life until 3 years ago. 3 years ago in the summer, in July of 2022 is when something profoundly changed my life. And I was a person where I was probably on average, on a scale of 1 to 10, you would characterize me as someone who was probably like at my best, a 1 or 2, nothing bad was happening, but I was always living in the future, and I was always, thinking about the past. And when I was hopeful about the future, I felt good. And when I was, worried about the future, I was anxious. And I was a person that was like letting my ego drive really how I showed up in the world. And when things went well, I was great. My brother used to have the saying that when business is bad, I'm the worst person to be in business with, because I would just sit there and like nauseatingly just obsess about what was going wrong in the business and try to problem solve and use my monkey brain. And when we were making money, I was great to be in business with. And when we weren't making money, it was not fun. And for me to be an entrepreneur and to have that type of constitution was a really hard thing for my brother to deal with, who's a little bit more just like go with the flow. And he's been my business partner for over 20 years now, over 25 years now. So that was me. And I just had kind of resolved that I'm just an anxious person. I identified in that way. And I used to say that, like, my first time like recognizing anxiety was probably about 9 years old. I was in 4th grade. And I remember my grandmother was kind of an anxious person. We called her a worrywart. And I was like, oh, I'm just like my grandmother. I'm a worrier. I'm a person that worries about all these worst case scenarios. A lot of that's baked out of like, just having kind of a tough things happen in my life as a child, and growing up in a family where there was abuse, and I've talked a lot about it on the show, but it's part of who I am as a human, and so that's who I was. And I was always how I overcame that was through achievement. In some ways I was because I would create value for myself and I would win. And what I learned though was like the winning was not that satisfying. Like I would win and I would just feel like kind of go back to feeling like shit until I would win again. And I would get these moments of like elation that were very short lived. And I'd go back to like worrying about hitting my next goal. So if you start thinking about all of my, a lot of the content I put out is around, is talking around the things I've done to kind of overcome it. But I'm going to actually tell you the whole story right now. And so, the story starts out in the summer of 22, and I took my family to Oaxaca, Mexico, a very special place in my family's heart. And we went and lived in Oaxaca for 30 days, for a month, internationally. And we had rented a home there, and we were, kind of just hanging out. And one of the things I had promised myself that I would do during that time is I would really kind of minimize the amount of work that I was doing. So, at that point I was doing a lot of consulting with companies. I had the podcast, and that was it. And so I anything that was not on the calendar, whether that be coaching CEOs and I didn't do any podcasts. We just played reruns actually. So it was just like my few meetings I had. I was just kind of free to do what I wanted for a month. So I was kind of working part-time for 30 days. The first part of that month, by the way, like was 4th of July. So I just took those week and a half off. So I took a week and a half off, July 1st through, call it like the 8th, 9th, 10th. And then I started working around like the 10th. And it was very part-time, a couple hours a day at most. So I had an exorbitant amount of free time. And up until that point, I had been distracting myself away from my anxiety. I keep myself super busy. And by the way, I didn't realize I was doing that until this trip. And so I was super anxious. Now, let me take a step back. I was a person that I had an exit in 2020, and I was super anxious going into my exit because I had to negotiate my exit with my business partners. It ended up being a pretty good exit, but it was a pretty nerve-wracking, especially for someone like me that worries about the future a lot, or at that point worried a lot about the future. And when I had the exit, when the moment came, the wire hit my bank account, I had this moment. I was laying in my pool and I just like fell in and I feel so happy. I was just sitting there laying. I was like, oh my God, that's done. And I hit this, like this financial point in my life where I was, pretty comfortable. And there was this moment of just like, I guess, like no anxiety, just surrender and happiness and just like weightlessness. And then I went back into like grind mode right after that. This was July of 2020. So this is about 2 years later. I went back into grind mode. I was really, really busy building a bunch of different things, many of which are alive and well today. But I'm in Oaxaca and I'm sitting there and I'm kind of a basket case. Now, any normal person would have looked at my life and written down everything that was going on in my life at that moment. Like, personally speaking, my family, my business, my income situation, my, just my financial ability to do the things I want to do. And they would have been like, dude, you have a pretty good life. Like, you have a life that most people would be pretty stoked to have. And I'm sitting there in Oaxaca, Mexico, freaking having the worst anxiety I've ever felt. And the interesting thing is this, I couldn't understand it because I was like, there's no reason for me to have this anxiety. And I was worried about what am I going to do with my life? And I was worried about money. And I was worried about every single dysfunction in my brain was coming to life. And it was really intense. It was like kind of like the most intense anxiety that I felt for a long time. I was like on a scale of 1 to 10, I was probably like close to a 10. Like I was like really uncomfortable. And I was obsessing about my exit and why it wasn't good enough. And I was obsessing about where I was at in my life and the mistakes I had made, like building my last business and my dynamics with my previous business partners all through my life, all my business partners. And I was obsessing about the past and obsessing about a future that had not yet happened. And I was sitting there and it was out of control. Like I was having to like meditate a couple times a day. I wasn't present with my family, and we're on vacation living in Mexico and like this amazing city. And I'm sitting there like completely just focused on all these negative things. And fear was in my head and I was not grateful, and envy and greed. And I mean, every bad quality you could think of was just alive and well. And it was just eating me up inside. And so I was pretty unhappy. I was not doing well. And a couple of things were kind of in place. Number one was that for whatever reason, like my Wi-Fi wasn't like the Wi-Fi where we lived wasn't working that well. And I didn't really have access to anything. Like I didn't have access to social media. I didn't have access to like any of the distractions that I normally would kind of consume at that moment to just like, to get out of my head. I wasn't working. And I just was around my family, which was a gift, and I wasn't taking full advantage of it. And I was just kind of like in a daze. I was kind of in this zombie mode. And my wife, Mariah, kind of called me. She's like, "Man, you were just like not here with us." And I was like, "Yeah, I know. I'm having really bad anxiety. This is like not good." And it kept going on. And it got really bad the first, probably week and a half, just because I had this like all this free time and nothing to do. couldn't go and like plan anything. And I was writing stuff down in my, I journal on my phone a lot. And I was writing stuff down. It was just around like the things I was pissed off about. And, and a lot of it had to do with me just like beating myself up about the past decisions I had made and me not being happy about where I was. And again, if any rational human would have listed what my life looks like, would have been like, dude, you are an ungrateful loser. like how can someone have the life you have and feel the way you feel? And it just goes to show you that happiness comes from within. So the way the house was set up was they were almost these like individual suites. Like, and my youngest son, who again, this is 3 years ago, at the time was about 8 years old. He didn't like sleeping alone, and it wasn't, and it was almost like apartments within this house. And so my wife would sleep in the same room with him because he didn't want to be alone. He felt like he was scared to be alone, so she would sleep with him in his like little room, and I slept next door in my room, and which was kind of a bummer, but it was fine because he was scared. And so at night, though, what was interesting was my cell phone actually could pick up social media. And so I would go on social media and I'd watch, YouTube a little bit. I was reading a lot and listening to a lot of books then. So I would do that as well. And I stumbled upon a social where I saw a social of a clip of Robin Sharma, former guest on The Greatest Machine, being interviewed by Ed Milet. Now at the time, and I hope Ed might hear this. At the time, I wasn't a huge fan of Ed's. Like, I grew up in SoCal, and he has a certain like look to him, which is awesome. He's a jack dude, and but he looks kind of has a SoCal look to him. And I grew up, and I had certain just thoughts in my head about people that looked that way, and I knew that he was a social media guy, and I just had like honestly the wrong impression of what Ed was and what he was all about. I knew he had made a lot of money in, I think, multi-level marketing, and he was he's done amazing stuff, but at that point I didn't really know what the work he'd done, and I wasn't a huge fan. And it was funny, it was interesting. So again, I'm not a big fan, but I know of Robin, and I'm seeing him interview Robin Sharma. Now, who I am a big fan of is myself, and I love the way I interview, and I love my shows. I'll listen to my shows. I'll listen to this solo that I'm putting out right now. I'll listen to and I enjoy my own shows. So if you ever wonder if I like my own stuff, I eat my own dog food, the answer is absolutely. I love to. And I'm listening to Robin getting interviewed by Ed, and Ed is just asking the best questions of Robin. And it was funny. I was just like completely changed my perspective on Ed at that moment. I was like, man, that guy asked some really smart questions. Again, not being a fan. And I was like surprised by it. And so I went down into the wormhole of Ed Milet, and I started looking at a bunch of his social. And I was like, this guy is a really smart guy. Like, he's really, Ed, if you're listening, you figured it out, right? And I was like, A, impressed, and B, I wanted more. So under the concept of wanting more, right around the same time, he had just put out his book, The Power of One More, which I've talked about on the show before because it changed my life. And changed my life the night that I'm telling you the story about right now. And so I at that moment in my life, I was reading books, and I had a way I read books, which we've talked about on previous episodes, which the way I read books was I would listen to books. I was listening to books, and I listened to the first chapter of any book. I said, I'll give any book 10 minutes of my time. If you can't hook me in the first chapter, probably I'm going to turn you off. If you're like half hook me, I might go 1 or 2 more chapters in, depending on how long the chapters are. And I think I read 35 books. I listened to 35 books in 2022. I probably started 100. So I was very like open to starting books. And so I started the book, The Power of One More, and it was 11 o'clock at night. And let me just take a step back. I have this belief that like God, I know some of you may not believe in the higher power, but I definitely do. And this is all about like how that happened. Like, this is a big part of me going deeper on that journey. And I'm not a religious person, but I'm very, very attuned with there being a higher power. I believe there's a higher power, and that the higher power shows us things when we need to see them. And at that moment in my life, I believed that the higher power showed me things, like showed me what books I needed to read when I needed to read them. And this story that's going to be a couple part story for solos is going to be about that. And so I'm listening to, I started listening to The Power of One More. It's about 11 o'clock at night, and I listened to it, and I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning that night, just ravenously taking notes, listening to this book, just blowing my mind, like one second after the next. And there was like a few key concepts. You should all read the book. It's one of my favorite books. I read it at least once a year. But there's a couple concepts that really stood out to me. And the first one was who lives in your emotional house. I've talked about this on previous episodes. It came from that book and it came from this night. And I was just being kind of honest with myself. I was like, well, who's living in my emotional house? Who am I allowing to live here? Why am I allowing them to live here? And I got really clear that I'm letting really negative thoughts live in my emotional house. Fear was a big one. Envy, greed, dissatisfaction, ungratefulness. And I was like, man, who do I want to live in my emotional house? And the answer was happiness, joy, gratitude, love. And I was like, if I'm going to be real with myself, probably 90% of the time, it's the negative thoughts. And I get these moments in time where I get to enjoy joy, that I'm just living in peace and joy and gratitude and happiness. And I was like, man, that sucks. That kind of sucks if I'm going to be honest with myself. I don't want to live like that. And I was tired at this moment. I had a rough 2 weeks. In fact, I call this my rock bottom moment. Now remember, like, everything's going great in my life, and yet I'm not happy. And I'm living this way. So that was one of the concepts that really stood out to me. The second concept that really stood out to me was a concept that he talks about that he learned from Jim Rohn, which is if you are dwelling on the past, it's the equivalent of carrying around suitcases filled with cement. And you have a choice of, do you want to be a person that carries around those suitcases filled with cement, and carry that weight with you, or let go of them? And I realized at that moment that I had spent I was 44 at that time, 44 years of my life, most of it, probably not 44, but probably at least 40, 38, something like that. I can remember. I mean, I only remember dwelling on the past, probably like when I was like in elementary school was when it started. I can't remember if I did it when I was a little kid. I doubt if I did. So at least 3 decades of me doing it. And I was like over it. And I was like, I don't want to do that. And the last concept that really stood out is the title of the book, The Power of One More, which is, what are you one mooring in your life? And I felt like I was pretty good about one mooring, like effort towards my business and trying to make myself a better person. But was I one mooring more love with my family, or one moment of joy, one more moment of presence? And the next day was a Friday. It was Friday, July 15th, I believe. And I was going to have brunch with my wife at this really nice little cafe in Oaxaca that we loved. And we were supposed to spend the morning together and spend the day together. And I made myself a promise that day. And the promise was that I was going to turn off all the people that lived in my emotional house that I didn't want there. Turn them off. They weren't allowed to be there. Fear, greed, anxiety, unhappiness, ungratefulness. I was going to turn them off, and I was going to turn on all the things I loved for the day. And I was going to let them live there for the entire day. And I gave myself an out. I said, you are only allowed one day of this, just one. You only have to like live in happiness and gratitude and fearlessness and joy and peace for the day. And then on Saturday morning, if you want, Darius, you can go back to asshole beat yourself up mode. But you got to stick here for one day, and you're going to do a bunch of one mores. And you're going to let go of the emotional baggage that you've been carrying forever. And you're not going to think about all the past stuff. You're just going to be present for that day. And so I made myself that promise. And so the next day I get up, we go to breakfast, and I did exactly what I said I was going to do. The entire day, I was living in the presence, in joy and gratitude. I wasn't thinking about my past deals or past businesses that didn't go the way I wanted, or how my exit turned out that maybe wasn't to my liking. I didn't think about the future that wouldn't go my way. I was just present for that day. And that was a turning point in my life. I had the best day I ever had. I felt better that day than I did when I talked about earlier in the episode when the wire came through for my exit. I felt better. In fact, I said to myself, this felt as good or better than that day. And it was an amazing turning point in my life in that I allowed myself the freedom to be present and to live in the emotional house with the emotions I wanted to have around me. Love, peace, gratitude, happiness, just embracing my family, presence. And it was a moment that changed my life that I've never gone back to after that. So this is part one of a multi-part series where I'm going to be talking about my next week's episode. I'm going to be talking about what happened after that day, what happened after that Friday, what happened on Saturday. So stay tuned for what happened on Saturday. I can promise you that there's a lot more here to learn, and it goes way deeper, way deeper, because this is just the beginning of this journey of what ended up becoming about a 4 to 6 week journey that completely transformed who I am as a human being. And I'm so grateful to have had that rock bottom moment, because those next 4 to 6 weeks have transformed who I am, how I live, and how I think about life. And I'm really grateful to get to share this with you all. I've been holding back on this story for a long time. And I feel comfortable now sharing this with the audience and with the world. So until next time, peace out. We love you.
She's my lover.
You are listening to The Greatness Machine, and that's a wrap for today. Listen, if you love what you heard, subscribe to the show on whatever podcast platform that you're tuning in on, so that you don't miss any of our future episodes. We have tons of great people coming on, and we're stoked to have you here to enjoy it with us. Leave us a review. Tell us what you love most about this particular episode. We love getting the reviews. We love to see what you guys love most. And if this particular episode, made you think of someone who's leveling up in their business and in their life, print screen, share it with them. Leaders are the best givers. And after all, we're all here to support and grow with each other. And in case you want to see some of the fun behind the scenes shots or some of the things that we're doing, I'm actually writing about this in my weekly newsletter. Go to www.therealdarius.com and subscribe to my newsletter. We're talking about fun things like business and life and mindfulness and cryptocurrencies and gosh, I don't even know, everything and anything, but it's tons of fun stuff I write about. I try to get it out on a weekly basis. You can subscribe at www.therealdarius.com. And with that said, look, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you. I love you. Peace. We're out of here. See you guys on the next one.
She's my lover.